When a royal aide stumbled upon a centuries-old chest during routine preservation work, no one expected what lay within. Tucked beneath layers of linen and obscured by time was a jewel unlike any in royal records. But the real shock? A name delicately embroidered into the silk lining, Catherine. And suddenly, Buckingham Palace was no longer quiet. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The discovery was not part of any grand event or state announcement. It happened quietly, almost accidentally, during an otherwise mundane inventory check deep within the royal vaults. Aides tasked with cataloguing overlooked items had opened what appeared to be a simple, dust-covered chest, unlisted, unmarked, almost forgotten. But as the lid creaked open, the atmosphere shifted. Inside, wrapped in layers of age-worn fabric, was a jewel so exquisite it took their breath away. Unlike anything currently displayed or referenced in the official royal collections, the piece shimmered with a brilliance that suggested not just wealth but purpose. What raised immediate concern was that the chest had no registration, no provenance. In a system where every piece is obsessively documented and traced back through history, this was an anomaly. Palace staff, stunned, began pulling at the fabric lining the box, only to find beneath it a hand-embroidered message, "To her, whose grace reigns above all." The craftsmanship was old, very old, but what came next turned confusion into chaos. Tucked under a delicate flap was a folded note, its parchment fragile but still legible. One name was written in flowing script: Catherine. Just Catherine, no surname, no title. But in that room they all knew exactly who it meant. At first disbelief took hold. Some thought it was a cruel joke or a misplaced theatrical prop. But as the documentation beneath the jewel was examined, it became clear this was no accident. The writing style, ink type, and wax seal markings all suggested that the jewel's concealment had been deliberate. One aide, visibly shaken, whispered that the handwriting looked eerily similar to that found in Queen Elizabeth's private correspondence. Another speculated whether the entire chest had been hidden with the intent of resurfacing only under the right conditions. As word of the discovery travelled swiftly through the inner circles of the palace, theories exploded like wildfire. Was it a forgotten gift? A secret inheritance? A symbol of something far more orchestrated? No one could say. But within hours, internal calls were made. Security footage from the archive room was pulled. The chest was transported with full protection to a private vault, and yet the name remained the only undeniable clue. Catherine. Nothing else mattered. The whispers turned to dread. Senior aides huddled in back rooms, debating whether or not to inform the king immediately. One source close to the situation confessed, "It's not just about the jewel, it's about what it means, and if it's meant for her, everything changes." And change, it seemed, was already underway. Because while the public remained unaware, behind the palace gates the storm had already begun to form. Whispers weren't just about a beautiful artifact. They were about succession, legacy, and the rising shadow of a woman many now feared was becoming more than just the future queen consort. They feared she was becoming the chosen one. But while the palace scrambled to contain the firestorm, questions had already begun to swirl. Who hid the heirloom? And why was Catherine the only name it bore? Just days after the heirloom surfaced, a long-retired lady-in-waiting passed away quietly at her countryside home. Hidden beneath her floorboards was a leather-bound journal, its ink faded, its contents incendiary. The pages told of loyalty, betrayal, and a vow to protect a secret that could shake the monarchy's foundations. Lady Margaret Harrow had lived her final years in near silence, tucked away from the public eye and largely forgotten by the royal household. But once, she had stood at the very heart of it all, an ever-watchful shadow beside the Queen Mother. Her death, initially mourned with routine condolences, quickly turned into the ignition point of a deeper investigation. While sorting through her belongings, her niece uncovered the journal, a time-worn, unassuming artifact bound in leather, but carrying a legacy no one was prepared for. The first page was dated decades prior. The last had been penned just 2 days before the jewel was discovered. Within those pages, a storm had already taken shape. Margaret described herself as the last guardian of an heirloom, referred to in hushed reverence as the crown's conscience. A name never recorded in official archives, never seen in public parades, but passed down behind locked doors from sovereign to sovereign, not as treasure, but as burden. According to Margaret, the heirloom had been entrusted to her care by the Queen Mother herself under circumstances cloaked in mystery. She wrote of a private conversation, one not held in the throne room, but whispered in the stillness of Balmoral's rose garden, away from staff and eyes. The Queen Mother, nearing the end of her life, had summoned Margaret for one last duty: keep the heirloom hidden until a woman of true grace, not just blood, could wear it. The journal's middle pages were filled with observations, coded names, and tense entries hinting at inner palace conflicts. Margaret noted a growing fear that the heirloom would fall into Camilla's hands if no one intervened. She documented moments where the Queen Mother reportedly resisted pressure from unnamed advisors to release the piece into the royal collection. One entry referenced Princess Diana's quiet awareness of the heirloom's existence, though even she, according to Margaret, never fully knew its significance. Another chilling page mentioned Elizabeth II's decision to let the matter rest, but never disputed her mother's wishes. But Margaret did not rest. She remained a lone sentry, watching from the margins, waiting. Toward the journal's end, her tone shifted. The final entries grew frantic, urgent, as though the passing of time had begun to choke her resolve. "The signs are here," she wrote. "The one we waited for walks among them now. She wears no crown, yet she holds the people's faith. The time has come, it must return to her." No name was stated outright, but the capitalized her appeared again and again in the last pages. With Catherine now linked to the heirloom by name, and Margaret's own account declaring that its rightful bearer would be someone not chosen by protocol but by principle, the implication was undeniable. News of the journal hit the palace like a second tidal wave. Advisors who had hoped the first discovery could be Bury. Ed now faced a new dilemma. This wasn't just about a jewel anymore. It was about a woman who had watched monarchs live and die and left behind a manifesto that pointed to only one successor of a deeper legacy. And it wasn't Camilla. It never had been. And, with Margaret Harrow's final confession echoing through the palace, a storm was already brewing in the highest echelons of royalty, one centered around Catherine. And the heirloom she never knew was hers. Camilla expected discretion. What she received was exclusion. When reports reached her that the hidden heirloom bore no connection to her lineage, but instead Catherine's palace walls shook under the Queen Consort's outburst. This was no longer about jewels. It was about legacy, power, and something Camilla never expected: rejection. In a palace that prided itself on protocol and poise, what erupted behind closed doors was nothing short of a royal reckoning. Camilla, upon learning that she had not only been left uninformed of the heirloom's discovery, but deliberately bypassed in its examination, stormed into a private chamber where King Charles was meeting with senior advisors. According to insiders, what followed was a furious confrontation that left staff frozen in the corridors. Raised voices, pounding footsteps, and unmistakable rage pierced the thick walls of Windsor. Camilla demanded answers. Why had she, the Queen Consort, been excluded from a matter of such symbolic magnitude? Why was Catherine's name being whispered with growing reverence while hers was being erased from the conversation altogether? Her anger wasn't just rooted in pride, it was rooted in fear. For years, Camilla had fought tooth and nail to stabilize her role within a monarchy that had never fully accepted her. Now, with one mysterious object and a journal penned by a forgotten lady in waiting, that fragile balance was slipping. She accused King's closest aides of staging a coordinated effort to elevate Catherine at her expense. One aide, who later spoke anonymously, revealed that Camilla's words were laced with bitterness and desperation. "You've let them replace me with her," she reportedly shouted. "First the public adored her. Now you give her history too?" Allegations soon surfaced that this wasn't the first time Camilla had attempted to lay claim to a royal artifact meant for another. Whispered accounts suggested that years earlier, she had quietly requested access to a brooch long associated with Diana, only to be firmly denied by the late Queen. That refusal, they say, had never sat well with Camilla. And now, the heirloom steeped in secrecy and newly linked to Catherine, felt like a second, far more public rebuke. Desperate to regain control, Camilla began summoning her most loyal courtiers, attempting to reverse what she viewed as a symbolic coup. She pushed for statements to be released, documents to be clarified, and insisted that she be allowed to oversee all royal jewelry transfers moving forward. But her influence, once unquestioned in such circles, now met resistance. The king, torn between private loyalty and public optics, remained maddeningly neutral. Behind the scenes, he refused to take sides, offering vague reassurances without clear action. This ambiguity only deepened Camilla's sense of betrayal. For the staff who witnessed her unraveling, it was a moment laced with contradiction. On one hand, they saw a woman whose throne had never felt truly hers, now watching that illusion collapse. On the other, they feared what she might do next. Because in her silence after the shouting, Camilla didn't seem defeated, she seemed calculating. Her breakdown was not just grief, it was a warning. Yet even as Camilla struggled to assert control, the true origin of the heirloom and its direct path to Catherine was about to surface in a way no one saw coming. Tucked deep within Princess Diana's personal correspondence, previously sealed, was a letter marked private, to be opened when the time feels right. That time had come, and within the envelope, written in her unmistakable hand, Diana had drawn a line through the future and named Catherine its torchbearer. The discovery was as sudden as it was seismic. Amid the digital archiving of Diana's private estate materials, a small linen-wrapped box surfaced untouched for decades and sealed with her personal crest. Inside, a letter. Not a public statement, not a political note, but something profoundly personal. The handwriting was intimate, familiar to those who had seen her diaries. The content, however, was nothing short of historic. Diana had written with clarity and intent, referencing an unnamed object once worn in silence, now to be worn with strength. Those words gripped the few who read them, words that had never been meant for public release, but rather for that singular moment when destiny intersected with timing. And the moment, it seemed, was now. In her writing, Diana painted a picture of a monarchy in flux, of her own journey marred by isolation and betrayal, and of a vision she held for someone who would come after. She wrote not of lineage or blood, but of grace not as tradition, but as compassion. The words struck a nerve within the palace. For all the opulence and rules, Diana had dared to suggest that true royalty came not from title, but from presence. And in the same breath, she made it unmistakably clear who she believed embodied that truth. The allusions were subtle yet pointed descriptions that mirrored Catherine with startling precision. Diana never named her outright, but she didn't need to. She wrote of a woman who would rise not because she sought the crown, but because she carried weight with dignity. A woman who had endured scrutiny, who had stayed silent when others screamed for attention, and who had turned loyalty into her armor. The letter's closing lines were perhaps the most haunting. "Let her wear what I could not," Diana wrote. "She will know when." With those words, she passed more than a wish, she passed a legacy. Those who had once doubted the heirloom's purpose could now no longer look away. It was no longer just a royal artifact lost to time. It had become a symbol of Diana's unfinished story and Catherine's role in finishing it. In private corners of the palace, silence fell over those who read the letter. Even long-time skeptics, those who had once doubted Catherine's deeper resonance within the family, were left without rebuttal. The truth had come not from scandal, not from scheming, but from Diana herself, a voice from the past echoing with quiet certainty. It was this revelation that truly unraveled any remaining attempt to downplay the heirloom's connection. With the journal, the jewel, and now Diana's own words aligning like pieces in a divine puzzle, the resistance began to splinter. The palace could no longer deny that Catherine stood at the center of something extraordinary, something sacred. And for Catherine, who had long carried the pressures of public life with unflinching composure, the letter was not just a validation, it was a summons. The time she never asked for had arrived. She could no longer remain on the sidelines of the story others had tried to write without her. With Diana's words echoing in every corridor of the palace, Catherine could no longer remain silent, nor could those who had fought to keep this legacy hidden. When Catherine was summoned for a private viewing of the heirloom, she expected formality. What she received was far more intimate, a quiet revelation, a weight she hadn't asked for but cool. No longer deny. In that moment, her destiny within the royal family shifted, and those watching knew they had just witnessed a coronation of spirit. The private vault was dimly lit, guarded more by silence than by security. Catherine walked in with composed grace, unaware that what awaited her would do more than echo the past, it would define her future. As the chest was opened before her, there was no pageantry, no cameras, just the soft rustle of silk being pulled back to reveal the artifact that had already shaken the palace to its core. The moment her eyes met the heirloom, something within her cracked. Aides present would later whisper of a pause so profound it seemed to stop time. Catherine, usually so measured and precise, stood motionless, her hand slowly rising to her heart. And then, barely audible, she spoke the words. She knew. It was not a declaration but a realization. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to be told the stories that surrounded it. Somehow she already understood the connection between the heirloom and Diana, the echoes of Margaret Harrow's journal, the revelations sealed in that prophetic letter. It all aligned in that moment. A royal weight shifted onto her shoulders, and yet she bore it not with reluctance, but with reverence. Refusing to address the press or respond to whispers outside the vault, she instead made a quiet yet deliberate move. She requested access to the original journal and Diana's letter. If she was to understand this legacy fully, she would do so on her terms, privately, thoroughly, and without spectacle. Over the following days, Catherine became consumed with the history buried beneath the palace's polished exterior. Not just the lineage and logistics, but the meaning behind the piece. She uncovered references to its original design symbols, stitched and carved by women across generations, hidden within royal circles, passed down not as wealth, but as wisdom. The more she learned, the more undeniable the connection became. This wasn't a jewel to be worn. It was a silent crown, a message across time. Unspoken anxiety began spreading among certain senior royals. The way Catherine carried herself, now quietly empowered, deeply aware, and more connected to Diana's ghost than ever before, unsettled those who had long believed they controlled the narrative. Whispers emerged behind closed doors. Was this coincidence, or a quiet coup by fate? One insider noted that the most unsettling part was how naturally it all fit her. No announcement, no claim, just presence. That, they said, was what made her dangerous to the old order. Because unlike those who grasped for power, Catherine never needed to chase it. It had found her. But just as Catherine began to embrace her unexpected role, resistance brewed this time from those who feared what her rising symbolism could mean for the palace's fragile balance. Not all battles in the royal family are fought with words. As whispers grew louder and public interest surged, an invisible war ignited behind palace walls. And while Catherine remained composed, powerful factions were already drawing battle lines, determined to either elevate or erase her from history. The jewel had become more than a mystery. It was now a flashpoint, an emblem of allegiance or resistance, depending on where one stood in the crumbling hierarchy. Behind gilded doors and beneath layers of tradition, a calculated campaign began to take shape. Senior courtiers, some deeply entrenched in the old guard, moved swiftly to contain what they saw as a dangerous narrative. Meetings were held under the guise of procedural review, but their true aim was far less neutral: suppress the rising symbolism tethered to Catherine before it took permanent root. Proposals were drafted and quietly circulated, urging discretion and restraint. Media requests for images or details about the heirloom were swiftly denied, citing privacy concerns and ongoing archival investigations. The silence, however, was strategic, not protective. Within days, an internal memo leaked to select individuals. It claimed the heirloom was not of historical value, a phrase that sent shockwaves through those who had seen what the piece truly meant. It was a calculated contradiction, a direct attempt to erase its symbolic weight without confronting its presence. Simultaneously, pressure mounted around Catherine. Advisors who once stood at her side began offering carefully phrased suggestions. Perhaps it was best, they said, to refrain from public display. Perhaps she should wait until stability was assured. But stability, in royal language, often meant silence. And silence, for Catherine, was no longer an option. Yet even in this tightening noose of institutional control, allies emerged from the shadows. Lady Louise, quiet, poised, and often underestimated, began echoing Catherine's sentiments in hushed gatherings. Princess Anne, always one to see past optics, reportedly reminded those in meetings that truth doesn't need approval to exist. Their support wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. It sent a message to those hoping Catherine would step back. She wasn't standing alone. Amid all this, the king's position grew more precarious. Charles, usually a man of controlled gestures, became oddly silent. He neither endorsed Catherine's growing connection to the heirloom, nor did he intervene to suppress it. That neutrality, interpreted by many as indecision, only intensified the divide. His advisors urged him to speak. His courtiers begged for clarity. But Charles, burdened by the weight of both history and emotion, said nothing. And in that vacuum, the struggle escalated. The palace was no longer unified. There were factions now, those who feared Catherine's ascendance and those who quietly welcomed it. Every glance, every pause in conversation carried tension. It wasn't just about tradition anymore. It was about what the monarchy would choose to become and who would define it. The corridors of power grew colder, the conversations more coded, and the future less certain. And yet, in the eye of the storm, Catherine remained unmoved. She didn't need to fight loudly. Her presence had become the battlefield. But as the internal feud reached a boiling point, the final twist came not from protocol, but from the very bloodlines the monarchy had tried to forget. In a stunning twist that shattered assumptions, an obscure branch of the royal family emerged with documents revealing the heirloom's creation and the lineage it was meant to honor. What they uncovered linked Catherine not just to Diana, but to a royal woman history had erased. Until now. It began quietly, far from London, in a wind-swept corner of the Scottish Highlands. A forgotten estate once linked to the lesser-known branch of the royal family had been undergoing renovation when a cache of personal records was discovered in a decaying trunk beneath the flue. Our boards of an abandoned study. At first, local historians dismissed it as another unremarkable pile of old correspondence. But when a folded parchment surfaced bearing the seal of Princess Maud, daughter of King Edward VII, and briefly Queen of Norway, everything changed. Among the contents were references to a jewel crafted not for ceremony, but for sentiment, a tribute created after heartbreak, one she called a crown for the silenced. The object matched the description of the heirloom now tethered to Catherine. But it wasn't merely a match in appearance, it carried meaning forged in secrecy. Princess Maud, long thought to have died without direct heirs, had written in private letters about a child, a daughter, born out of scandal and hidden from public record to preserve the royal image. That child was never recognized, her existence scrubbed from family trees and official documents. But Maud's anguish seeped into every line of those letters. She had entrusted the heirloom to a loyal confidant, with instructions that it be passed down only through the line of truth, not the throne, not the crown, but the line born from courage, from suffering and from exile. Her final written hope was that one day, her descendant might reclaim what history had stolen. And now, that descendant had a name: Catherine. A genealogical team, stunned by the revelations, pursued a quiet investigation. DNA evidence, family journals and buried records began to piece together a lineage once buried in shame. Diana's maternal side had always intrigued historians with its noble ties, but never had anyone suspected this. The documents confirmed that Diana was a direct descendant of Maud's hidden child. And Catherine, through her marriage to William and through Diana's bloodline now woven into her children, stood as the living bridge to a legacy abandoned by power but protected by fate. The jewel, Maud's heirloom, had found its rightful bearer, not by accident, by design. The ramifications were seismic. Catherine was no longer just a royal wife, or even the poised future queen. She had become the culmination of a buried lineage, a living symbol of the forgotten, the rejected, and the rightful. What had begun as whispers about a mysterious heirloom had now become a full-scale redefinition of her place in royal history. She wasn't just aligned with Diana, she was aligned with a suppressed truth that rewrote the story the monarchy had told itself for over a century. And as this truth settled across the palace, it began to shake even the staunchest loyalists. The old order could no longer pretend this was coincidence. Every discovery pointed to Catherine not merely as a woman in waiting, but as a figure of justice long delayed. The whispers could no longer be silenced. The truth, carried through blood and burden, had finally reached its moment of reckoning. And now, the royal family faced a question it could no longer avoid. Would it honor the weight of what had been revealed, or attempt, one final time, to bury it? As the dust of truth began to settle, the palace faced one final inescapable decision. Would they honor the legacy now bound to Catherine, or attempt to silence it once more? With the world watching and palace tensions simmering, King Charles made a discreet yet deliberate move. During a private gathering at Windsor, he offered Catherine the heirloom, not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement. And in that moment, the crown sent a silent message: the future is hers. The air inside Windsor was taut with unspoken words. Invitations had gone out quietly, no formal titles, no fanfare, just a summons for a select few to attend what was described only as a family meeting. Present were Anne, Edward, and Sophie. Absent, without elaboration, was Camilla. Officially, her calendar cited unforeseen scheduling conflicts. Unofficially, the silence around her absence screamed louder than any statement. As the gathering began, Charles appeared somber, contemplative. He carried with him a small, unassuming velvet case. Within it, the heirloom that had ignited weeks of hidden war, secret legacies, and emotional reckoning. He turned to Catherine with a steadiness that only masked the gravity of what was about to unfold. There were no speeches, no declarations, just a moment, the kind that rewrites everything without saying a word. In front of his most trusted family members, King Charles extended the heirloom to Catherine. He didn't frame it as ceremony or as inheritance. Instead, he simply said, "This belongs where it was always meant to be." That gesture, brief but deliberate, marked the end of the palace's silent resistance and the beginning of something new. The act wasn't documented by press or posted to official channels, but it didn't need to be. The moment was witnessed, and those present understood its weight. In the royal archive, the event was quietly recorded as a symbolic transfer, acknowledging the heirloom's true origin and its place in Catherine's hands. There was no public statement, but behind the scenes, it was as if the monarchy had collectively exhaled. Catherine did not beam with triumph. Instead, she accepted it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through scrutiny, whispers, and attempts to erase her. As she walked out of the room, heirloom in hand, something had shifted, not just for her, but for the institution itself. The legacy that had been buried, fought over, and nearly lost had finally returned to the one who never chased it, but always carried its spirit. The moment may have lacked royal trumpets, but in tear stillness, it roared with meaning. Because this wasn't just about a jewel or a journal. It was about validation, justice, and a reckoning long overdue. Catherine had not demanded her place, she had earned it through grace, endurance, and truth. And now, with the past reconciled and the present realigned, her role in the monarchy was no longer a question of marriage or duty. It was a matter of destiny fulfilled. But as Catherine stepped into the corridor, heirloom in hand and legacy restored, one truth was undeniable: the monarchy may resist change, but it could no longer outrun destiny. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.